Okay, so let's move on to the brainstem. Now the brainstem is essentially our primitive brain. So this is highlighting our brainstem here, which is the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. So our brainstem is going to do a lot of things to keep us alive without us consciously thinking about it. So it works with the hypothalamus, and it also works with the autonomic nervous system. So let's get into it. So this switched for some reason already on me. So once again, here's the midbrain, here's the pons, and this is the medulla oblongata. This is a front view. This is kind of a side back view of it. All right. So looking at the midbrain here, these things right here in the front are the cerebral peduncles. So in the cerebral peduncles are primarily descending tracts. So we talk about tracts with the spinal cord. All through the brainstem, we're going to have ascending and descending tracts. So in the cerebral peduncles, we have primarily descending tracts. So they're going to send motor information from the cerebrum to the brainstem or the spinal cord. On the back side of the brainstem, so you can see it actually right here. All right, so of the midbrain, you see these 4 bumps. And those 4 bumps are known as a corpora quadgemina. Corpora means bodies, quad means 4, Gemini means twins. So 4 twin bodies is essentially what corpora quadgemina means. The upper 2 bumps on those, so the upper 2 bumps that we see there are known as the superior colliculi. And this is where our visual reflex center is. So it's going to coordinate head movements with and eye movements. So, you know, if like a bug, you know, flies by your head and you see that in your peripheral vision, you jerk away from that. That's a reflex that's going through your superior colliculi. The lower ones are the inferior colliculi. So this is our auditory reflex center. So we get a reflex associated with sounds such as a startle reflex. So if you hear a loud noise, you jerk your head in that direction, that's a reflex that's going through our inferior colliculi. Next is the pons. So this large thing right there is the pons. So the pons connects to the cerebral motor cortex with the cerebellum. All right. We also have in here the pontine respiratory center or respiratory group, and that's going to help maintain our normal breathing rhythm. And we also have the pontine sleeping center here, and that initiates a part of our sleep known as rapid eye movement, or REM. Next is the medulla oblongata. So this part here is the medulla oblongata. There's the medulla oblongata there. All right. So a lot of stuff occurs here in the medulla. One of the things is decussation. And decussation is a crossing over point of our nerve impulses. So essentially, you know, when I move my left arm here, that signal starts in my frontal lobe on my right side of my brain, and it's going to cross over my medulla oblongata to come over here to my left side of the body. All right, so this is why our left side of our body controls the right, so the left side of our brain controls the right side of our body, and the right side of our brain controls the left side of our body. So, you know, this is where that crossing over occurs for most of this stuff is within the medulla oblongata. Another is that it relays sensory information on the state of stretch in muscles and joints to the cerebellum. It also mediates responses that helps maintain equilibrium, sense of balance. We also have our cardiovascular center here. So it's going to adjust the force and rate of our heart contraction. It can also change blood vessel diameter to regulate blood pressure. Also in here is our respiratory center. So it's going to control the rate and depth of breathing and also maintains the basic breathing rhythm. It also has many reflexes. So it has reflexes for vomiting and hiccuping, swallowing, coughing, yawning, and sneezing. Okay, so those are the major parts of the brain and very simply what a lot of those things do. Now let's take a look at functional brain systems. So these are neurons that work together but are in different areas of the brain. So the first is the basal nuclei, which is what we see here, is the basal nuclei. So the basal nuclei is involved in controlling, planning, organizing, and coordinating motor movements and also our posture. It is located bilaterally in the inferior cerebrum, our diencephalon, and our midbrain. So these are showing all those areas. All right. Next is the limbic system. So this is trying to show the limbic system here. So this controls emotions and emotional responses to sensory input, as well as playing a role in memory, reproduction, and also nutrition. okay? So a lot of times it's referred to as just our emotional brain. So it's in parts of the cerebrum and also the diencephalon, which you see most of this is the diencephalon. So this is where an odor can trigger an emotional response and memories, as I kind of talked about before. So you smell, chocolate chip cookies, and that can trigger you thinking, oh, that reminds me of my grandma's house or whatever. Most input is relayed through the hypothalamus in here. And so this is why if you have a lot of high mental stress, this can lead to physical illness, because going through here causes us to secrete a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol then inhibits protein synthesis, and a lot of our antibodies are proteins and so on. All right, lastly here is a reticular formation. So the reticular formation extends through the brainstem. It is involved in somatic motor control. It's involved in cardiovascular control. It's also involved in pain modulation. It's also involved in sleep and consciousness. So you can have the loss, if you have a loss of auditory, visual, or other stimuli, this may lead to drowsiness or sleep. So, if you're seeing something repetitive over and over again, this can lead to drowsiness. So a lot of times, it's also our filtering system. So repetitive, familiar, or weak signals are filtered out so they don't reach our conscious brain, all right? So unusual, significant, and strong impulses reach our consciousness. So, as I always usually say in class, I ask my students, do you feel your clothes on you? Well, most people don't until I ask them to think about their clothes being on them. And the reason is, once you get your clothes on, your body starts, filtering out that sensory information, because you don't need to be told over and over again that your shirt is on. Oh, my shirt is on. Oh, my shirt is on. And that's essentially what all your touch receptors are sending to your brain. But you don't need that constant input over and over again. You need to know if, that constant input if all of a sudden your shirt gets magically removed, right? But you don't need to know all the time that it's still there, all right? So most of our sensory input is filtered out before it reaches our conscious brain. Only about 1%, so 99% of our sensory input is filtered out before it reaches our conscious brain. So only 1% reaches there. So let's look at other brain functions. So looking at speech. The speech area of our brain is on the left cerebral cortex, and we have two areas here. We have the Wernicke's area and we have the Broca's area. So Wernicke's area is a sensory speech area. So this is in the parietal lobe. So we can see right there, it's in the parietal lobe. It is necessary for understanding and formulating coherent speech. All right. Next is the Broca's region. So this is our motor speech area. And this is in the frontal lobe. And it initiates a complex series of movements for speech. All right. So next, let's look at brain waves. Normal brain function involves continuous electrical activity. And so we see this person hooked up to what is known as an electroencephalogram, or an EEG, and this records their brain functions. And what we get out of this are brain waves. So brain waves are patterns of neuronal electrical activity. And each person's brain wave is unique, but we will see some patterns there with brain waves. So I just want to point out, when you look at these waves here, and you see some of them are higher than others. Now, what that means at amplitude, so how high those waves get, indicates the number of neurons firing in synchrony, doing the same thing at the same time. This is not the degree of electrical activity. Our brain is working all the time. Most of the time, our electrical activity is not synchronous. But there are 4 different waves that can be shown here, and of course yours are going to be unique to you. But the first are alpha waves. Alpha waves are when we're calm, relaxed state of wakefulness. These guys are regular and rhythmic. Next are beta waves. Beta waves is where we're mentally alert and concentrating or having a visual stimulus. These are rhythmic but irregular. Next are theta waves. Theta waves are common in children. They are irregular. If they occur in adults, they're generally showing an adult who is either frustrated or maybe they have a brain injury there. Next are delta waves. Delta waves are what we see usually in deep sleep. If we see these in awake adults, this is just some sort of brain damage there. All right, let's look at memory. So different kinds of memory. The first type is called working memory. This is a very short-term retention of sensory input. This occurs when something is scanned, evaluated, and acted upon. And this lasts less than a second. So, like you look down, see a pen, grab it to write something down. You remembered long enough that there was a pen there to grab it and then start to use it. All right, so that's really all we're talking about with working memory. You're not going to remember that in a few days like, oh, yeah, I totally remember picking up that pen in class and then moving on. Next is short-term memory. So this is where the information is retained for a few seconds to a few minutes, all right? And only if that piece of information is considered valuable. So it is limited, so if we think it's valuable, we put it into short-term memory. It is limited by the amount of bits of information that can be stored. So, and this is typically lost when new information is presented or the person is distracted. So, you're in your house and you're like, oh, I need to get that pen from the other room, right? And so you walk into the other room and you get into the other room and you're like, why did I come in here? And so, this happens to all of us, and that's because you got distracted just by walking into another room and you lost that short-term memory. All right, so if it's even more important, we put it into our long-term memory. So this is memory that lasts hours or longer. And here, what we have is a process called consolidation. This is a process of transferring short-term to long-term, okay? So we get the formation of stronger synaptic connections. So we're really trying to keep this information. So we establish stronger synaptic connections. And this is due to either repeating the information and associating, it's repeating the information and also associating with existing memories. So cohesing that together. All right. So two types of long-term memory. One is declarative memory. So this is a memory that involves the retention of facts. So, knowing somebody's names and places and things like that. So is declarative memory. So if you remember, back in grade school, you had to learn all the capitals of this different states. That's declarative memory, right? Remembering people's names and so on. That's declarative memory. So this is stored in various parts of our limbic system. We store facts in the hippocampus, which I've mentioned before, and we use the amygdala for emotions, all right? So emotional responses with those facts, if there is any. Next is procedural memory. So procedural memory is memory that is involved in development of skills. So like riding a bike, playing the piano, writing, those are procedural memories. Those are stored in the cerebellum and the premotor area of the cerebrum. And we can really remember things if we put the two things together, declarative memory and also procedural memory. And that's why a lot of us, as we get older, we can still remember word for word songs that we used to sing along with when we were a teenager.